The Velani were dying, and Ambassador Thessaly knew it. She stood at the observation window of the Grand Council chamber, a crystalline body catching the light of her world's twin suns. Her people were beautiful creatures. Their bodies were made of living crystal that sang when they moved. They glowed with soft colors that changed with their emotions. Right now, every Velani on the planet glowed a deep, terrible blue, the color of fear. Outside the window, the sky was wrong. Where there should have been clouds and birds in the peaceful glow of sunset, there were ships, massive warships that blocked out the stars. 47 of them, each one larger than any building. On Valent Prime, they hung in the sky like metal monsters, waiting to feed the Kethfer had finally found. Them Thessaly had grown up hearing stories about the Kethfer Dominion. Every child in the galaxy knew those stories. The Kethfer were conquerors. They were hunters. They came from a world of endless war, and they had spread that war across 100 star systems. They took what they wanted. They used other species as slaves, as entertainment, as food. No one had ever stopped them. No one had ever tried. For 3,000 cycles, the Velani had hidden. They had built their civilization behind a dense nebula that scrambled sensors and confused navigation systems. They had kept quiet. They had sent no signals. They had prayed that the universe would simply forget they existed. But the universe never forgets. And the Kethfer were very good at finding hidden things. The Supreme Commander of the Kethfer fleet had sent his message 1 hour ago. His name was Virax, and he called himself the Unyielding. His face had filled every screen on the planet. He was tall, covered in dark scales, with 4 arms and eyes that burned like red coals. When he spoke, his voice was like stones grinding together. "People of Valen Prime," he had said, "you have 12 hours. Surrender your entire population for processing, or we will reduce your world to ash. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is your only warning." The transmission had ended. The Velani had panicked. Now 11 hours remained, and Thessaly's government was arguing about how to die. Some wanted to fight, though they had no weapons and no warriors. Some wanted to flee, though they had nowhere to go. Some wanted to simply accept their fate and hope for mercy from creatures who had never shown mercy to anyone. Thessaly had a different idea. It was a terrible idea, a desperate idea. But it was the only one that offered any hope at all. She walked to the ancient console in the corner of the chamber. It was covered in dust because no one had touched it in generations. It was connected to the Galactic Distress Network, a system that every spacefaring species could access, but no one ever used. The reason was simple. Answering a distress call meant fighting whoever was causing the distress, and no one wanted to fight the Kethfer. But Thessaly had studied the old records. She had spent years researching the other species of the galaxy, looking for hope in a universe that seemed to have none. And she had found something interesting, something strange. 40 cycles ago, a new species had joined the galactic community. They came from a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system, a planet called Earth, a planet that the Galactic Survey had classified as a Class 12 death world. Thessaly had not understood that classification at first. Then she had read the reports, and she had understood perfectly. Earth was a nightmare. The planet's atmosphere contained a corrosive gas that most species could not breathe. Its weather systems were violent and unpredictable. Massive storms tore across its surface. The ground itself shook and split open without warning. The water was filled with predators. The land was filled with predators. Even the smallest creatures on that world could kill with venom or poison or disease, and the humans had not just survived there. They had conquered it. They had spread across every corner of their deadly world. They had tamed fire and lightning. They had split atoms and touched their moon. They had done all of this while constantly fighting each other. The reports said that humans were strange. They formed bonds with dangerous animals and kept them as companions. They engaged in activities that could kill them purely for enjoyment. They ran toward danger instead of away from it. They had a concept called courage that seemed to mean ignoring fear entirely. The other species called them Deathworlders. They said that word with fear. Thessaly activated the console. Her hands trembled as she entered the distress code. The other council members turned to stare at her.
What are you doing?
Demanded Elder Christos, his body flashing angry orange. I am calling for help, Thessaly said. No one will come. No one ever comes. Perhaps not. Thessaly pressed the final button. The signal burst into space, carrying a simple message across the stars. But I would rather die hoping than die having done nothing else. The council fell silent. The signal traveled outward, bouncing through relay stations, crossing the vast emptiness between stars. Most species would receive it and ignore it. The Kethver were too powerful. Getting involved was too dangerous. 3 days passed. The Kethver did not attack, but they did not leave either. Varix was enjoying the fear. He wanted the Velani to truly understand their helplessness before he destroyed them. On the 4th day, the long-range sensors detected something. Thessaly was in her office when the alert came. She rushed to the sensor station, her crystal heart pounding with something she had not felt in days. Hope. What is it? She asked the technician. A single ship? A small convoy? The technician's body had turned white, the color of shock. Ambassador, you need to see this. Thessaly looked at the display. Her mind could not process what her eyes were seeing. Ships were emerging from hyperspace. Human ships. But not 1 or 2, or even 10? There were dozens of them. Battleships and carriers and destroyers and cruisers. An entire fleet armed with weapons that made the sensors scream with warnings. The Terran Third Fleet had arrived, and they had not come to negotiate. At the front of the formation flew a massive vessel with words painted on its hull. Words in the human language. Thessaly's translator worked for a moment, then provided the meaning. The ship was called Perseverance, for the first time in 3,000 cycles. The Valani had someone standing between them in the darkness, and that someone had brought enough firepower to crack a moon. Thessaly fell to her knees and wept tears of liquid crystal. She had hoped for a miracle. The Deathworlders had answered. Admiral Yuki Tanaka had been drinking tea when the distress signal reached Earth. She had been sitting in her garden in Kyoto, watching cherry blossoms fall into a small pond. It was her first vacation in 3 years. It lasted exactly 4 hours. Now she stood on the bridge of the TSS Perseverance, watching 47 enemy warships on her tactical display. Her tea was gone. Her vacation was a memory, but there was nowhere else she would rather be. The Perseverance was the flagship of the Terran Third Fleet. It was not a beautiful ship. Human vessels never were. Where other species built ships that were smooth and elegant, humans built ships that looked like angry metal boxes covered in guns. The Perseverance had armor plates 3 meters thick. It had backup systems for its backup systems. It had been designed by engineers who assumed everything would go wrong and planned for it. Anyway, other species thought human ships were ugly. Humans thought their ships were honest. Around the Perseverance, the rest of the Third Fleet held formation. 16 destroyers, 8 heavy cruisers. For carriers filled with fighter craft, to support vessels loaded with Marines who were already putting on their armor and checking their weapons. Every ship was painted gray and black, and every ship was ready for war. The alien ambassadors on board were not ready. They were very far from ready. Counselor Jirix stood behind Admiral Tanaka, his insectoid body trembling. He was a diplomat from the hegemony, assigned to observe human military operations. He had thought it would be boring. He had thought humans were new to space and did not understand how things worked. He had been very, very wrong, Admiral Jirix said, his voice clicking with barely controlled panic. You cannot do this. The Kethver have 47 warships. You have 31. The mathematics are simple. You will lose. Tanaka did not turn around. She was studying the enemy formation, looking for weaknesses. Counselor, I did not bring my fleet halfway across the galaxy to run away. But the Kethver have never lost a war. Never. In 200 cycles, no one has defeated them in battle. Their weapons are superior. Their ships are faster. Their warriors live only to fight. Interesting, Tanaka said. She took a sip from a fresh cup of tea. Her hands were perfectly steady. Have they ever fought humans? Jirix's antennae twitched. No. Your species has only been in space for 40 cycles. You have avoided conflict with the major powers. And how do they know they can beat us? Jirix had no answer for that. The question itself seemed insane to him. The Kethver were the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Everyone knew they could not be defeated. It was simply a fact, like gravity or the speed of light. But humans, he was learning, did not care very much about facts. Admiral Tanaka turned to face him. She was a small woman by human standards, with gray hair and lines around her eyes. She looked like someone's grandmother. She also had a reputation for tactical brilliance that had earned her the nickname the Storm among her peers. When she smiled, Jirix felt his exoskeleton rattle with instinctive fear. Humans smiled before violence. He had read that in a report. He had not believed it until now. Counselor Tanaka said calmly, "Let me tell you about my species. We evolved on a planet where the air will rust metal if you leave it outside. Our weather includes storms that can level cities. 70% of all life on our world is venomous, poisonous, or predatory. Most species would look at Earth and see hell. We looked at it and said, 'This is home.'" She set down her tea and clasped her hands behind her back. "We domesticated wolves, Counselor. Do you know what a wolf is? A pack predator with teeth that can crush bone. We looked at those creatures and thought, those would make good friends. We kept them in our homes. We let them sleep with our children." Jirix made a sound that his translator could not interpret. It was something between horror and disbelief. "We invented war before we invented writing," Tanaka continued. "We have been fighting each other since before we could record history. We have developed more ways to kill than any species in the galaxy. We have split atoms. We have created weapons that could destroy our entire world. We did this not because we needed to, but because we wanted to see if we could." She turned back to the tactical display. The Kethver ships were beginning to react to the human presence. They were moving into attack formation. "The Kethver think they are predators," Tanaka said softly. "They think they are the most dangerous creatures in the universe. They have never met an actual apex species." She pressed a button on her command console. Her voice echoed through every ship in the fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Tanaka. You know why we are here? There are people on that planet who called for help. They are peaceful. They have no weapons. They have no one to protect them. The Kethver plan to take them as slaves or kill them for sport." She paused. Every human in the fleet was listening. That is not going to happen. Not today. Not while we draw breath. We did not cross the stars to watch innocent people die. We did not build this fleet to run from bullies. Tanaka looked at the enemy ships on her display. 47 of them, each one larger than her biggest vessel. Any sane military commander would retreat and call for reinforcements. Yuki Tanaka had never been accused of being sane. "All ships, increase speed. Set course directly for the enemy line. Weapons hot. Do not fire until we are close enough to see the whites of their eyes." Jirix grabbed the railing to keep from falling. "You are charging them. That is suicide." Tanaka smiled again. "Counselor, in human history, we have a saying. Fortune favors the bold. The Kethver expect us to be cautious. They expect us to be afraid. They expect us to behave like every other species they have ever conquered." The fleet began to accelerate. 31 human vessels, engines burning bright, heading straight toward the enemy. "We are going to show them what Deathworlders really look like," Tanaka said, "and then we are going to make them regret ever hearing the name human." On the planet below, Ambassador Thessaly watched the human fleet charge towards certain death. She did not understand. She could not understand. These creatures had nothing to gain by helping her people. They were risking everything for strangers, but they were coming anyway, and they were not slowing down. Supreme Commander Varax, the Unyielding, had conquered 11 species. He had burned worlds and broken empires. He had watched civilizations beg for mercy and received none. In 200 cycles, the Kethver Dominion had never lost a battle. Today, Varax was afraid. He stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Hunger, watching the human fleet approach. His scales had turned pale, a sign of stress that he hoped his crew could not see. Everything about the situation was wrong. Everything about these humans was wrong. They were charging directly at him, with inferior numbers and smaller ships. "Supreme Commander," said his tactical officer, "the human vessels continued to accelerate. They are not changing course. They are not attempting evasive maneuvers. They are simply ... coming."
Oh.
"I can see that," Verax growled. "Have they responded to our warnings?" "Yes, Supreme Commander. They sent a single message." "What did it say?" The tactical officer hesitated. His own scales had gone pale. "It said, 'We know nothing more.'" Verax felt something cold move through his chest. Every species that Kethvar had ever conquered had responded to their warnings with fear. They begged. They pleaded. They offered tribute. They asked for terms. They did anything to avoid battle. The humans simply said, "We know," as if the warnings did not matter. As if the threat of death meant nothing to them. What kind of species behaved like this? "Fire warning shots," Verax ordered. "Perhaps they do not understand the power of our weapons." 3 Kethvar warships opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked across space and struck the lead human vessel, the Perseverance. Verax watched his display, waiting for the ship to break apart or veer away. The Perseverance kept coming. Flames licked from holes in its hull. Smoke poured from damaged sections. And still it accelerated. Still, it charged forward. "That is impossible," whispered the tactical officer. "Those shots should have destroyed their main engines. They should be dead in space." Verax zoomed in on the human ship. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. The humans were making repairs while under fire. Small figures in armored suits were crawling across the hull, welding plates over the damage. Inside the ship, damage control teams were fighting fires and rerouting power. The Perseverance was wounded, but it was not stopping. It was not even slowing down. "They are insane," Verax said. "They must be insane." The human fleet was close enough now for detailed scans. Verax studied their vessels and felt his fear growing with each piece of information. Human ships were ugly. They were blocky and graceless, covered in armor and weapons. But they were also built in ways that made no sense. Every system had backups. Every backup had backups of its own. The ships were designed to keep fighting even after taking massive damage. They were built by creatures who expected to be hurt and simply did not care. And the weapons. The Kethvar had powerful plasma cannons and missile systems. The humans had those too. But they also had weapons that the scanner database could not identify. Strange projectile launchers that accelerated metal slugs to impossible speeds. Energy weapons that cut through shields. Bombs that collapsed space itself. These were not defensive weapons. These were weapons designed for total war. Weapons designed by a species that had spent its entire history learning how to kill. All ships, open fire. Verax screamed. "Destroy them." The Kethvar fleet unleashed everything it had. Space lit up with plasma fire. Missiles streaked toward the human vessels. Any other fleet would have been vaporized. The humans took the hits and kept coming. Ships burned. Ships bled atmosphere. But ships did not stop. Human cruisers plowed through the barrage with their armor smoking and their guns blazing. Human destroyers wove between the plasma bolts at speeds that should have killed their crews from the force alone. Human fighters launched from carriers and immediately dove into the teeth of the enemy fire. Their pilots screaming challenges over open communications. Verax watched a human pilot take a direct hit that destroyed half her fighter. Instead of ejecting or retreating, she used her remaining engine to accelerate toward a Kethvar destroyer and crashed directly into its engine section. She ejected 1 second before impact. Tumbling through space with her arm raised in a gesture that Verax's translator identified as an obscene insult, the destroyer exploded. The pilot was recovered by a passing human shuttle. Verax could see her through the viewport, smiling and waving. What are these creatures? He whispered. The battle became chaos. Human ships broke through the Kethver line and turned to attack from behind. They were everywhere at once, their formations shifting and adapting faster than Varax could respond. His commanders reported confusion and panic. Kethver warriors were trained to face enemies who were afraid. These humans showed no fear at all. Then the boarding parties came. Varax had heard rumors about human soldiers, ground fighters who covered themselves in armor and carried weapons designed for close combat. He had dismissed these rumors as exaggeration. Now he watched those soldiers breach his ships with cutting torches and grenades, flooding through the holes like angry insects. The humans were smaller than Kethver warriors. They were weaker. They should have been easy prey. They were not easy prey. Human marines fought like demons. They moved in coordinated groups, covering each other, advancing steadily through corridors filled with enemy fire. When one fell, the others avenged them with brutal efficiency. They did not hesitate. They did not retreat. They treated the battle like a problem to be solved, and they solved it with violence. On the planet below, Ambassador Thessaly watched the battle through her scope. She saw human ships taking terrible damage and refusing to die. She saw Kethver vessels beginning to drift, their systems destroyed, their crews defeated. She saw things she had never imagined possible. Why? She asked again, as she had asked 100 times since the humans arrived. Why would they suffer so much for us? A Valeni elder stood beside her. He was ancient, his crystal body clouded with age. But his colors had changed from fearful blue to something warmer. Something like hope. Perhaps, he said slowly, there are species in this universe who believe that some things are worth suffering for. Thessaly looked up at the battle in the sky. The humans were winning. Against all logic, against all reason, against an enemy that had never known defeat. And they were doing it for people they had never met. The battle had been raging for 6 hours. Supreme Commander Varax was losing his mind. He had started the day with 47 warships. He now had 32. 15 of his vessels had been destroyed or disabled, their crews dead or captured. The humans had lost 8 ships in return, but the survivors fought on as if the losses meant nothing, as if their fallen comrades were simply motivation to fight harder. Varax had never seen anything like this. Kethver battles followed rules. 2 fleets met. They exchanged fire at long range. The weaker fleet eventually retreated. Casualties were minimized because dead warriors could not fight future wars. The humans did not follow these rules. They treated the battle as personal. Every ship that fell seemed to make them angrier. Every Kethver vessel they destroyed made them hungrier for more. They were not trying to win tactically. They were trying to make a statement. That statement was, "We will break you." The TSS Perseverance was at the center of the chaos. Admiral Tanaka had driven her flagship directly through the Kethver formation, splitting the fleet in 2. Now the human vessels were hunting the scattered Kethver ships in groups, like wolves chasing wounded prey. The irony was not lost on Varax. His people had always been the predators. Now they were learning what it felt like to be hunted. Shouted his communications officer. "The humans are hailing us." Varax turned to his main screen. A human face appeared. Admiral Tanaka. She was small and gray-haired and should not have been terrifying, but there was something in her eyes that made Varax want to look away. A coldness. A calculation. The look of a predator who already knew she had one. Supreme Commander Varax Tanaka said calmly, "You have lost half your fleet. You have failed to harm the planet you threatened. Your warriors are dying in boarding actions across a dozen ships. I am offering you one chance to withdraw." Varax forced himself to show his teeth, a sign of aggression among his people. "You are outnumbered. Human. I still have more ships than you. I can still destroy you." "You could try," Tanaka agreed. "But let me tell you what will happen if you do." She leaned forward. Her voice did not rise, but somehow it filled the entire bridge. "If you continue this fight, I will destroy every ship in your fleet. I will capture every surviving member of your crew. And then I will take my fleet to your homeworld. Do you understand? I will follow you home, Varax. I will park my ships in orbit around every Kethfer colony, and I will explain to your people exactly what happens when you threaten innocents. Verax felt his scales turning white. You are bluffing. Your government would never authorize such an attack. Tanaka smiled. It was the worst thing Verax had ever seen. I am not asking for authorization, Supreme Commander. I am telling you what I personally will do. You threatened to murder an entire species for sport. You gave them 12 hours to prepare for slavery or death. That is not war. That is cruelty. And where I come from, we have very strong feelings about cruelty. She gestured to someone off-screen. My communications officer is currently broadcasting a message to your homeworld. We are telling the Kethfer people that their fleet attacked a defenseless civilization and was defeated by humans. We are telling them that if their military ever threatens another innocent species, we will return. Rex checked his own communications. She was telling the truth. The message was already spreading through Kethfer space. His people were learning that their undefeated fleet had been stopped by aliens they had never heard of. The shame would be enormous. The political consequences would be worse, but that was not what broke him. What broke him was the realization that Tanaka was not making threats. She was making promises. He could see it in her eyes. If he continued this fight, she would do exactly what she said. She would chase his fleet across the galaxy. She would follow them home. She would make the Kethvar pay for every life they had taken, and every species they had enslaved. This was not a commander fighting a strategic battle. This was a force of nature. This was what happened when a Deathworld species decided something was wrong and needed to be corrected. Your species is insane, Varric said quietly. Perhaps Tanaka agreed. But we are honest about it. Now make your choice, Supreme Commander. Withdraw and live. Fight and watch everything you have built turn to ash. The bridge was silent. Every Kethver officer stared at their commander, waiting for his decision. For 200 cycles, the Kethver had never retreated. They had never surrendered. They had never admitted that any species was their equal. Varric closed his eyes. He thought of his homeworld. He thought of his family. He thought of all the things the humans would destroy if he continued this pointless battle. And for the first time in his long career, he chose survival over pride. All ships, he said, his voice hollow. Withdraw. Full retreat. The Kethver fleet began to turn away. Ships that had ruled the galaxy for 2 centuries fled before the guns of an alien species they had never heard of. Varric watched the human vessels holding position, not pursuing, simply watching them go. On the planet below, Ambassador Thessaly saw the Kethver ships turning. She saw their engines flaring as they ran toward open space. She saw the human fleet standing between her world and the retreating enemy like a wall of iron and fire. They are leaving, she whispered. The Kethver are leaving. The news spread across Valon Prime in minutes. The crystalline beings who had prepared for death suddenly understood that they would live. They poured into the streets, singing in frequencies that shook the ground. They wept and laughed and held each other. They had been saved. The humans had saved them. On the bridge of the Perseverance, Admiral Tanaka watched the enemy fleet disappear into hyperspace. Her crew was cheering. Counselor Zirix had collapsed into a seat, his body cycling through colors that had no translation. The battle was over. Tanaka did not cheer. She simply nodded, as if this outcome had never been in doubt. Communications, she said quietly. Send a message to the planet. Tell them the threat has been eliminated. Tell them we will remain in orbit until they feel safe. She paused and looked at the blue and green world on her screen. A world full of gentle creatures who had done nothing wrong except exist. And tell them, she added, that Earth is happy to help. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The Kethver Dominion, the most feared military power in known space, had been defeated. Not by a coalition of great empires. Not by an ancient civilization with vast resources. They had been defeated by humans. A species that had only been traveling among the stars for 40 cycles. A species that most galactic powers had dismissed as primitive and unimportant. On 1,000 worlds, people watched the recordings of the battle. They saw human ships charging directly into enemy fire. They saw human soldiers boarding HFY vessels and fighting hand-to-hand in the corridors. They saw the moment when Supreme Commander Verax, unyielding, ordered his fleet to retreat. That moment changed everything. For 200 cycles, the galaxy had lived in fear. The HFY took what they wanted. Smaller species hid, or surrendered, or died. There was no hope of resistance, because resistance was impossible. Everyone knew this. It was simply how the universe worked, and then the humans had proven everyone wrong. On Valen Prime, celebrations lasted for 3 days. The crystalline beings filled their cities with music and light. They had prepared for extinction. Instead, they were alive and free. The monsters who had threatened them were running in shame. Admiral Yuki Tanaka walked through the capital city during the celebrations. Her uniform was still scorched from the battle. She had not slept in 2 days. But she had wanted to see the people she had saved. Not so she had come down to the surface with a small group of officers. The Velani treated her like a hero. They surrounded her, singing songs of gratitude. Their bodies glowing with colors so beautiful that several human soldiers wept just from seeing them. Children made of living crystal touched her hands and laughed at the warmth of human skin. Ambassador. Thessaly found her in a garden of crystalline flowers that chimed like bells in the wind. Admiral Tanaka, Thessaly said. Her voice was soft with emotion. I do not know how to thank you. My people were going to die. We had accepted our fate. And then you came. Tanaka smiled gently. You sent a distress signal. Someone had to answer. But no one answers those signals. Everyone knows that. The risk is too great. The HFY are too powerful. Why would you sacrifice so much for people you have never met? Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the alien sky above them, purple and gold in the light of the twin suns. So different from Earth's blue, so beautiful in its own way. Ambassador, she finally said, my species spent most of our history fighting each other. We invented war before we invented writing. We created weapons that could destroy our entire world. We came very close to ending ourselves more than once. She sat down on a crystalline bench and gestured for Thessaly to join her. But somewhere along the way, we learned something important. We learned that strength without compassion is just cruelty. We learned that power means nothing if you do not use it to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Tanaka looked at the Velani children playing in the garden. Human Marines were teaching them a game that involved throwing a ball back and forth. The children's laughter sounded like wind chimes. Where I come from, Tanaka continued, we have a saying. The measure of who you are is not how you treat the powerful. It is how you treat the desperate. The Velani are peaceful. You have no weapons. You have no warriors. You were helpless against the HFY. She turned to face Thessaly directly. Her eyes were warm. That is exactly why we had to help you. Because you had no one else. Because you sent a signal into the void, hoping someone would answer. Because that hope deserved to be rewarded. Thessaly felt tears forming in her crystalline eyes. Humans are very strange creatures. Yes, Tanaka agreed. We really are. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change. 12 species formally requested alliance with the Terran Coalition. They had watched the battle at Valen Prime, and they had seen something they had never expected to see. They had seen hope. The humans accepted every request, and began the long process of building friendships across the stars. The HFY Dominion fractured. The defeat at Valen Prime had shattered their reputation for invincibility. Subject species began to rebel. Slave worlds rose up against their masters. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 200 cycles began to collapse under the weight of its own cruelty. Counselor Xerix returned to the hegemony with his report on human military capabilities. The report was classified at the highest level. When the Hegemony Council read it, 3 members resigned immediately. The rest voted unanimously to never, under any circumstances, provoke a conflict with Earth. The report contained a single recommendation. If the humans offer friendship, accept it. If they offer trade, take it. If they ask for cooperation, give it freely. And if they warn you about something, listen. This species is not our enemy. But they could be, and that must never be allowed to happen. On Earth, the news of the victory at Valen Prime was celebrated quietly. Humans had been fighting each other for so long that they had almost forgotten how to celebrate fighting together. But something had changed. When they looked at the stars now, they did not see just territory to be claimed. They saw people who needed help, people they could save. The Terran Third Fleet returned home as heroes. Admiral Tanaka was offered promotions, medals, political positions. She declined all of them. She only wanted to return to her garden in Kyoto, to drink tea and watch the cherry blossoms fall. But before she left the Perseverance for the last time, she gave a speech to her crew. The recording of that speech was leaked to the Galactic Network and spread to every corner of known space. "We did not cross the stars to conquer," Tanaka said. "We did not build these ships to terrorize. We came out here because we wanted to see what was beyond the sky. And when we found people in trouble, we did what humans have always done at our best. We helped." She looked at her crew, at the soldiers who had fought and bled for strangers, at the pilots who had risked everything for people they would never see again. The galaxy is going to learn who we are now. Let them learn this. Humans answer when someone calls for help. We fight for the innocent. We protect the weak. And we will never, ever turn our backs on someone who needs us. She smiled one last time. That is what it means to be human. That is what it has always meant. And no matter how far we travel, no matter what enemies we face, that will never change. In the dark corners of the galaxy, powers older than humanity watched these events with growing concern. They had observed countless species rise and fall. They had seen empires born and die, but they had never seen anything quite like the humans. These Deathworlders were dangerous, not because of their weapons or their ships, but because they genuinely believed that every life had value, that every cry for help deserved an answer, that every desperate hope was worth fighting for. That kind of belief could change the galaxy. And as the ancient Watchers looked toward Earth with new eyes, they understood something that would keep them awake for centuries to come. The humans were just getting started.